and welcome to this edition of Berkshire Matters. I'm Bob Dean, and I'm your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking with Lee Rotrova, who is the president of the, let me find the name here, the Berkshire Coalition for Suicide Prevention. And Lee, I understand that there's a lot of important things that we really want to be talking about, but let's start with what is the Berkshire Coalition for Suicide Prevention and how did you come into existence?
So the coalition was formed in 2009, and it was formed in response to a series of youth suicides that happened at the time. A bunch of like-minded people got together and decided that they wanted to see what they could do to prevent suicide. So we are part of the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention. There are 10 regional coalitions throughout the state, and we receive money from the Department of Public Health to try to help to prevent suicide. Basically, we try to educate people. We have resources available, and we have survivor support groups. Many things that we do are funded through the state.
So in terms of suicide, and you and I had talked before the show about some of these things, I think there's a concern among a lot of people that if someone mentions that they're feeling depressed or maybe they should just kill themselves, I think there's a feeling among a lot of people that you kind of want to tiptoe away from that. What is your advice in that area? Should we just not say anything, or should we talk to the person about what they just said?
Yeah, absolutely shouldn't shy away from it.
Okay.
What people are sending a message if they're talking about it. One of the warning signs of suicide is talking about suicide. And often people will do that in a joking manner. And so they make it easy for people to just say, oh, well, he's just kidding, or she's just kidding. You should always take it seriously if someone is talking about ending their life. And the most important thing is that you, by mentioning the word suicide, you're not going to put the idea in their head. People seem to think that if you say suicide, that suddenly the person is going to think about killing themselves. It's the other way around. They've already thought about it, or they haven't. You know, maybe it isn't, maybe they're not suicidal. Maybe they are just depressed and need some help and want you to listen. And the most important thing that any of us can do is to listen to other people. If someone is talking to you about how they feel, listen, put your phone down, you know, give them your attention and really pay attention to what they're saying and see if there's a way that you can help.
And I think that's, to me, very reassuring as well, what you just said, Lee, the fact that, you know, if someone doesn't want to respond because we're afraid we don't know what to say and we might say the wrong thing, the most important thing, it sounds like, is to pay attention and to listen, to let that person talk about why they would be thinking that or why they would be saying that.
Yeah, and it's really important, specifically now, I think, with COVID, that one of the things that often lead people to think of ending their life is that they feel isolated and alone. And many of us are isolated and alone because of COVID. You know, others of us have, you know, family or pets or people that they are in contact with. They can Zoom. But many people are spending a lot more time by themselves than they ever would during normal times. So they can get isolated and can go into kind of a tunnel vision of thinking that it's never going to change, it's never going to get better. And sometimes just having someone to listen and say, well, you know, I feel alone too, but we'll get through it together, can be life-saving, actually.
So what are some of the suggestions you could offer in terms of some of the things we might ask or might want to say? And I think you just gave us a couple important ones, is just to let someone know that, you know, they matter to us and they are important.
Exactly. One of the other things that sometimes lead people to feel that they want to end their life is that they might feel like they're a burden to other people. And it's called perceived burdensomeness. And it's perceived is in there for a reason, because when someone dies by suicide, if you are at the funeral, people are not saying, oh, they were such a burden, I'm glad they're gone. They're saying, I wish they had told me. I wish they had reached out. I would have helped them. I would have done anything to help them. And it wouldn't be a burden. So, it's very important to listen, and it's very important to be supportive. You don't have to be a mental health professional to help someone who's feeling suicidal. Ideally, you would want to get them to a mental health professional to encourage them to seek help. But sometimes it's just being able to listen and have some compassion for someone.
And maybe as you're talking, I'm thinking, boy, this is also an opportunity for us to maybe reach out to someone who we haven't connected with in a while and might be particularly vulnerable in this COVID-19 environment, and just hey, how you doing? And then
Exactly.
Reach out when we have a little bit of time so that we can then listen to that person's response to that question, how you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of risk factors, things that put someone more at risk for suicide. Some of them are, family history, if there's mental illness in the family, or if they've had someone in their family die by suicide, that can put a person at a higher risk. Also, health issues, chronic pain, or serious physical issues can put someone at risk. Substance abuse can put someone at a higher risk. So those are risk factors. They're not predictive of suicide. Just because it's just like, if there's a history in your family of heart disease, that doesn't mean that you're going to have heart disease, but you're at greater risk. Yeah. So those kind of things you have to keep in mind. And then there's warning signs, which are more concrete and more immediate than a risk factor. If they show up in different ways. They can be changes in the way people talk. They can be changes in the way people behave. There can be mood swings. If someone's mood is very different than what it usually is, that's a warning sign. Mm-hmm. If someone who has been very happy and happy-go-lucky is suddenly very depressed and sad, that's worth saying to the person, I notice that you don't seem like yourself. Is everything okay? And that just opens up a conversation. And sometimes we're really afraid to just make that initial comment, to say, are you okay? What is happening with you? Right.
Yeah, I see also, because I was looking at your website with the risk factors and the warning signs, and it also talks about increased use of alcohol or drugs, which I would think can also impair the judgment and maybe take away some of that, I don't know, where we're more cautious and may make someone impulsive and do something that, they and we may all wish and regret that they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes away some of your fear. It makes you more reckless, and that's another thing, that reckless behavior is another warning sign. If someone is suddenly, drinking a lot, or using drugs when they don't normally use drugs, or driving really fast, or doing things that are endangering themselves, that may be a sign that they are really not that invested in staying here. But
so those are things where someone may not say, oh, I'm thinking about killing myself, but they're just may be doing all of these acts that are pretty much, the acts are speaking for them instead of the word.
Exactly.
In regards to, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
in regards to, if someone is saying that they're thinking of, maybe taking their own life, should we ask them, have you thought about how you would do that? Or should we get into that area to see if they actually have come up with a plan, or how they're thinking in that regard?
Well, I think that can be in the conversation. Mm-hmm. That would be further along in the conversation. Yeah. If someone really says, I just want to die, a question of, well, do you have a plan, is very important, because if they do have a plan and they tell you what it is, you can help to kind of thwart that plan, to put that plan aside. What we know from the research is that people who decide to take their lives in a particular manner, will not necessarily find another means if that is blocked. So, for example, if they were going to go to a bridge and jump off a bridge, and there's a barrier at the bridge, they're not going to suddenly decide to do something else to end their life. That breaks the plan, and that gives you time to try to get them help. One of the biggest things that we can put between someone who is suicidal and the act of suicide is time, because there's a critical period where people are not thinking clearly. They're in so much pain that all they can think about is ending their pain. And many people don't actually want to die. They just want the pain to stop. So trying to find a way to help them with that pain, whether it's through counseling, whether it's through, if it's a physical pain that is, you know yourself, if you're really in pain, if you have a horrible toothache or a backache or you're in labor, you probably wouldn't know that so much, but women that are listening, if you're in labor, you're not thinking clearly, and you would not be able to give someone, say, clear directions to get somewhere when you're in that kind of pain, because your mind is consumed with the pain. So if you can stop that cycle long enough so that someone can get help, it can make all the difference.
Do you have any suggestions, and this is a hard one, I think, on how we can talk to someone who is saying, yeah, I did think of it, and yeah, I kind of have a plan. I have some old medication that I know is pretty potent, and I just don't feel I want to go on. I mean, how can we talk to that person about, well, why don't you talk to a counselor, and I could help you and things like that, because I think there's still such a stigma of mental health challenges and having a mental health or a counselor of some sort, and any ideas in that area?
That's a bigger problem. I mean, mental health stigma is really an issue for most people, but in the scenario that you're talking about, the first thing to say is, will you give me those pills? Will you give me those pills? Let me take those pills. And you don't necessarily have to say, I'm going to destroy them. Say, let me hold on to them. And it's the same with if there's a firearm in the house. If someone, to say, could you lock it up and give me the key? Or, in Massachusetts, we have very strict laws about who can touch a firearm and move a firearm. So you wouldn't be able to just take that out of the house unless you have the proper licensing and whatnot. But you could say, can we lock it? Can you give me the ammunition? Can we separate you from the means in long enough to talk about what it would mean to get some counseling or some help? And in a severe situation, you may need to take someone to a hospital or call 911. That's not the first line of defense, because that can become get out of control very quickly. So you would want to try, we're assuming that you have a relationship with this person. This is not someone you met on the street, that this is someone you care about, and they know that you care about them.
Yeah. And again, it sounds like anything that you could do to almost break the circuit at that particular time, and to buy time. And then, hopefully just that person would reconsider and realize, maybe this isn't what I want to do. At least this isn't what I want to do today.
Right.
And then,
you don't have ultimately the control. It's a person's decision whether they want to stay alive or not. What you have control over is trying to help. You can control your reaction, and you can control that you are going to try to help this person. You can't make the decision for them. And that's why it's not, when you listen to someone, you don't start telling them all the reasons that they should live. Well, you have a great family, and you have this and you have that, because on some level, they do know that.
Yeah.
But, you're not going to change their mind about their situation. But if you listen and say, I understand, or that must feel awful, that must be really difficult, really actively listen to someone, that's much more helpful than trying to solve it. You're not going to solve it for them. This is a confluence of factors has brought someone to suicide. It's not something that just happens overnight. There are all kinds of different things, and it's not easy to unpack all that. But, if you can give someone enough of your attention that they feel like, well, somebody will care. Somebody cares about me and wants to help me. That's really important.
And I think that's so significant what you're saying, because the idea that, oh, if only I had done this, I could have saved that person, or I could have prevented this. I would think that there's a lot of guilt among family and friends of someone who has committed suicide, thinking right along those lines, I should have done something, I could have done something, where you're saying more that, there's only so much that we can do, and the big thing seems to be listening.
Right. And, and that's not to say, that people, what I'm saying is people shouldn't feel guilty, that if they lost someone to suicide, that it was their fault, because it wasn't their fault. It wasn't that you didn't text them yesterday. That's not why someone chose to die. It's a whole host of other factors. So going forward, we'd all want to try not to have that happen to anyone, but it's not to say that people who have lost someone are guilty. It's not their fault. It's the person's own decision. Okay. And that's really important. If you're a survivor of suicide loss, if you've lost someone you love to suicide, it's an awful loss of a loved one. You don't have to add guilt on top of it, to make you feel even worse than you already feel having lost someone. But going forward, we can try to listen to people and to be able to maybe see the signs that we didn't see. And the only way we can do that is by educating people. And that's why we try to do a lot of public education and training, so that people are able to look and say, ooh, that doesn't sound good to me. I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to call that person.
Yeah, that sounds important, that if we have a little bit of that information as the citizenship, that we may be able to, again, break that circuit and give someone a little more time to realize, oh, I really don't want to do this. Could you tell us a little bit about the survivor groups? You mentioned the survivor support groups.
Yeah, so in the Berkshires, we have one lost survivor support group. And they meet I believe on Tuesdays now. We're just starting to try to get in-person meetings together again on site. We've been doing it by Zoom, and it's difficult. It's a difficult group to run by Zoom, but that's where we are for now. In the future, hopefully it'll be in person again. And it's for people who have had a loss by suicide, because there's it's different than losing someone to a car accident. It's different than losing someone to cancer. It's still grief, but it's complicated grief because of what you just brought up. There's guilt, there's a lot of stigma, so that people may not reach out to a family who's lost a family member by suicide in the same way. I just recently heard someone, a colleague that had lost someone by suicide, and they said, I don't know what to say. And I thought, well, what would you say if it was a heart attack? Say the same thing you would say, bring the casserole, say, I'm sorry for your loss, try to be, because people feel shamed and stigmatized, like something was wrong with their family because they lost someone, and it's just not true. And the support you give to someone who's had any kind of a traumatic loss means a lot. And, that's how we'll change stigma, and for people to be able to say, I lost my husband, or my family member died by suicide. And then you'll find people say, oh, well, I lost an uncle, or it touches everyone, as much as we'd like to think that this is something that happens to other people. Most families have lost someone to suicide.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point, because it seems that the things that are the hardest and the cruelest for us to try to move forward after something happens are the ones that we're also, because of that stigma, we're not able to talk about and then get the support that we really need. These deep, dark secrets that just add pain on top of pain, I think.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is that 1 in 4 of us will have suffer from some touch with mental illness in our lifetimes. So that's 25% of the people this is not something that is a hidden thing that only happens to certain families. you wouldn't say to someone that there was something wrong with them because someone in their family had heart disease, or, mental illness is an illness. And then when we start treating mental illness like we treat physical illness, that will help with the stigma. And that's something that everyone can do, to not turn away when someone has an issue with mental health, and to try to help, just like you would try to help if someone, we have telethons and walks and all kinds of things for heart disease and Alzheimer's and breast cancer. And we do have it for suicide prevention as well, but there's a different feeling. It seems to be only people who have directly been affected by suicide. And that's what we want to open it up to the whole community, to come together and say, this is a problem in our society. We want to try to help.
And in that way, maybe prevent a lot more instances going forward, because
that's the hope.
And there is still such a stigma around mental illness, and I think it's getting a little better, but it's still.
I do too. I think it is getting better, and we are actually seeing, because of the pandemic, this is one of those weird kind of silver linings, that people who have never been, let's say, anxious or depressed, can be very anxious and depressed during this pandemic. Mm-hmm. If you're not anxious and depressed, you're basically not paying attention, in my mind. Lots of things have been going on. Lots of bad things have happened. So we have a little bit more understanding of what it feels like to have an anxiety disorder, or to have clinical depression, where you just don't want to get out of bed in the morning, because, let's face it, we've all felt that way in the last 9-10 months. I think, I'll own it. I've been, especially in the beginning, so anxious about what was going to happen. And, so I think people are, actually, there are more mental health resources out there. I think there are a lot of different people. You'll see on the screen the different hotline numbers. You can reach out to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, to the Berkshire Coalition for Suicide Prevention, to NAMI. Berkshire County has what they're calling a warm line, which is not a crisis line, but it's just a place where if you want to talk to someone, you can call and talk to someone. So we're trying to make available resources that people can reach out to one another.
And again, I want to reinforce, I think one of the main points that you've made is that those of us who know nothing about counseling per se can really make a difference by caring and by listening. And those are two basic, I think, human skills that we all have to some degree or another. And if we really can show someone that we care and that we want to listen, and then, as you said, we actually do listen. We do listen. Yeah. Stay on our phone or our whatever, which I think that's all too often in today's existence.
You can't make it worse. You can't make it worse by listening and caring if you're truly listening. This is where people are afraid. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. They're afraid of mental illness sometimes. And not that everyone who dies by suicide has a mental illness, but most people do, whether it's been diagnosed or not. Many people have mental illness that isn't diagnosed or treated. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that we haven't really touched on is how important it is to take care of yourself as well. We talk about self-care, about getting enough sleep and drinking enough water and doing some kind of mindfulness, or going for a walk outside, or, having nutritious food. Those kind of things also help someone who's struggling. So maybe you take somebody for a walk with masks on, socially distant, and you walk and talk. That is so helpful for people's mental health. I have a dear friend I walk with at work when we were all in work in person. We walked every day, and you just have a time to just kind of sort things out and bounce things off someone else. It's amazing how much that helps. And, we can all do that for someone. We can listen.
And isn't that the truth? That's such a basic, simple suggestion. We can listen, and we can walk with someone or whatever, and just, again, giving them our attention. And I would bet it helps us too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. it's true. Trying to help someone else is definitely, if you know you've done something for someone, that makes you feel better too. So, I mean, it's a lot, you know.
Yeah. So is that part of it too? If we're talking to someone to just, I mean, when's the last time maybe they saw a doctor? Do they have food in the house? Do they, what are they? Just basic things like that. Should we get into that at all based on how well we know the person? Or
I think it's based on how well you know the person. I mean, it's hard to say to someone, gee, you seem to be drinking a lot more than you have been. You're not going to say that to someone who's a casual acquaintance, but you might say it to your sister, or you might say it to your, to somebody that your best friend, and say, whoa, what's happening? Well, I see this. The thing is to say, I see this behavior. Sometimes when people have this behavior, they're depressed or they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? And just say what you see. And then they can say, well, yeah, maybe I have been drinking more, but I'm not thinking of suicide. They're not always connected. The warning signs and the risk factors, it's not always that dire, but even if it isn't, there's something causing it. And you're asking if you're okay and can I help? Is there anything I can do? Do you need me to run to the store for you, or whatever it might be? I mean, I can't really overstate that we have to take care of each other. There's no one else that is going to do it. And you may be the only person that notices that something's going on. So if you're that only person and you do nothing, then you could lose someone. And it wouldn't be your fault, but you might be the only one. So what's the harm of speaking out and saying, are you okay? Can I help you? What's happening? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, you might get the person mad at you temporarily, maybe for longer than temporarily, but if it ends up really, truly helping that person, then certainly I would think it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think if you do it right and you're caring and sincere, how could someone be upset that you care about them? It might be off-putting at first, but you're not going to lose anything by trying.
Yeah. So we have a minute left. Final thoughts, Lee. Boy, this went fast.
Yeah, my final thought is just don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay. Use the tools that you can use. Again, Bob, you said they'll be on the screen, the hotline numbers. You can call one of those hotlines too if you're worried about someone else. It doesn't have to be that you're struggling. You could call and say, I'm worried about my friend Bob, and I don't know what to say to him. And they'll walk you through it. They will help you.
Really?
So, yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. Please go to the websites or call the hotlines and try to take care of one another.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lee, for all that you do, and thanks for sharing this really important information. I certainly think that this can help many of our viewers and people who are joining us on this show. And thank you very much, Lee, and be well.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Take care.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.